What's going on, everybody? This is No Bad Days. I'm Ryan, and today we are going to discuss my personal experience with living with anxiety and panic disorder. Hopefully today I can answer some important questions for you, such as what are panic attacks, what are anxiety attacks, what are some coping tools, and how do you live a full life while struggling with these. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, so please consult your doctor or a mental health practitioner. If you have any questions or you're struggling with anything, they're your best person for advice. So we'll get right into it. So what is a panic attack? A panic attack is a recognized disorder by the DSM-V. It's a sudden episode of intense fear that triggers severe physical reaction when there is no real or apparent cause. Some of the symptoms can be trembling, chest pain, chills, dizziness, fear of loss of control, shortness of breath, tightness in throat, and so on. You need technically 4 of those to be occurring to be deemed a actual panic attack and be recognized as a panic disorder. And what are anxiety attacks? Anxiety attacks are basically a lesser version of a panic attack, and anxiety attacks are not recognized as a disorder by the DSM-V. So anxiety attacks are less severe than a panic attack, maybe short-lived, but can persist for days or sometimes weeks. So it's the certain level of anxiety, but a heightened level of anxiety. So often a lot of people will live with anxiety, but as they can feel it creeping up, it will develop into an anxiety attack. Not as severe as a panic attack, but still very real. It's going to be met with very similar symptoms, but often a little bit less, such as being irritable, trouble controlling worries, muscle tension, restlessness, trouble sleeping, things like that. Anxiety attacks can be a prelude basically to a panic attack as well, so they can build up and develop into a panic attack. So that's basically just an outline of what a panic attack is versus an anxiety attack. So I'm going to get right into my personal experience with it, and then we'll delve into some of the tools and systems that we can use to be able to cope with them. So I had my first panic attack in 2001. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I kind of play through my head those events on a daily basis. So I was in a store in the mall, and I was trying to do something in regards to my cell phone, and I felt like this just wave come over me, almost of dizziness, not shortness of breath, but really of confusion, and I felt like I was in danger. I was with a friend at the time, and I kind of nudged him and said, can we go outside for a sec? And as we proceeded to walk out of the mall, I had to basically take a knee. I felt like I was going to pass out. And I didn't really have shortness of breath, but I was shaking heavily and very disoriented and dizzy, and vision was a little bit off. And because I was drinking so much at the time, I thought that maybe I was having something to do with that. And so basically I asked him if he could go grab me some juice or something with sugar in it to get my blood sugar leveled. And once I had gone outside, I sat on a bench, and I just couldn't shake this feeling of just dread, and I was scared, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I think that was the worst part. It was just the not knowing of what was actually happening. He was able to go get the car, and he rushed me to the hospital. While I was at the hospital, they hooked me up to a bunch of machines, went through a bunch of stuff. We're trying to establish what ultimately had happened. And at the end of the day, after some monitoring, they deemed that I had just had a panic attack. I was a very confident person, and this shook me. There was never a point in my life prior to this where I thought I couldn't do something. I never tried hard at anything, but I also believed if I did try at anything, I'd be successful at it. This immediately put a roadblock into my life that I've carried with me to this day. After I got home and kind of was settling in after the events of what had occurred that day, I was afraid to not be able to breathe. So I actually would wear a mouth guard in my mouth to kind of keep my mouth open so air would be able to come in and out. That happened for like the first 6 hours, say. And then I tried to go to the pharmacy to get something. As soon as I got there, I had to turn around and come back. I was unable to do that. And I really didn't know what to do. This was the first time in my life where I wasn't able to think myself out of this situation, and I really was struggling on how I was going to deal with this. I reached out to an employee assistance program, and they connected me with a therapist, and I went and met with a psychologist, and I never got honest with him, and I started to try to do some work that way. In the meantime, I also went to my family doctor, and he prescribed me Paxil, which is an antidepressant, which is often used for anxiety. I think a big part for me was that I kind of went misdiagnosed in the sense that I wasn't honest about anything with the amount of alcohol and drugs I was using. So it was not really, I didn't feel that the drugs that they gave me were effective, and it didn't give me relief. It just ultimately took away the edge and really made me not feel like who I was as an individual. So I stopped taking the medication, and I just upped my drinking and drug use to combat it. I realized pretty early on that when I would get shaky or nervous or scared, I could have a drink and it would take that edge off. Clearly that's not a coping mechanism. That is just masking the problem and only going to make the issue greater. But that's what I did, and I did that from 2001 until 2016. I did not believe that I was ever going to be at a point in my life where I could actually do anything without being panicked, stricken to the point that I couldn't do it, or do anything without drugs and alcohol in my system. So when the opportunity came to go to treatment for my drug and alcohol use, the first question I wanted to know was, can we deal with my mental health issues while I'm there? And they said yes. They told me yes, they can, because my big fear was being trapped in this house. Because with the panic and anxiety, I've really developed basically becoming a hypochondriac. I always thought I was sick, and I was always checking to see if I was sick, and I just had this constant dread. So basically I was living in this constant fear. So the best way I can describe it to somebody who doesn't suffer with anxiety or panic disorder is that feeling when somebody says, that you care about, like, we need to talk. That kind of gut drop, like that wave come over your body. That's how I kind of felt and sometimes feel like all day, every day. If you were to say, hey, can you go grab something from the car? I start going through this checklist of negative things that basically could occur. So when I had the opportunity to go to treatment, I wanted to address these mental health issues, and they said, yes, we can address them. So as soon as I got there, I didn't feel as panicked as I thought I was going to. And ultimately what happened is that they weaned me off drugs and alcohol. And as that happened, and I started to get my life a little bit more back in order, a lot of this anxiety and panic started to disappear. I didn't put two and two together, that maybe the way I was living was part of the problem with my mental health, and that I was carrying so much baggage and guilt and stuff like that, that I was constantly at this heightened level of anxiety. So the panic attacks were just on the verge of always happening. Once I got sober, started to make some positive changes in my life, also made spiritual change as well as physical change. I really felt the anxiety and panic come down much lower. That's not to say that I do not still struggle with it. And I still struggle with it to the point that I'm still teetering on whether or not I'll go back on medication. At this point in time, I'm not taking any, but I may go back on it. I would never discount any possibility. I just want to live the fullest and best life I possibly can. And for me to dismiss medicine would be ridiculous. So at this point in my life, I don't take it, but who knows? I'm not against taking it, and I may take it at some point in the future. I still struggle with basic fears. I struggle with fear of heights, hate flying, things that I never had an issue with in the past. And but for the most part, my life's very full today. I live a life where the panic is there, but I can accept it. And I've been able to live a very full life since I made these changes. So I had to make some core changes. Obviously, I had to eliminate the alcohol and drug abuse. I had to change my physical practices as well as my spiritual. So that's my basic experience with it and my lived experience with it. But these are some coping tools and some mechanisms that I think are very helpful on a day-to-day basis. And so some of the things that I like to do is, first and foremost, I had to learn how to recognize my panic attacks, like recognize the triggers and symptoms as they were coming on. I think one of the big problems for me is that maybe there's a signal disconnected somewhere here where I have something happen to my body and it instantly tells my brain that it's something else. And I had to start to recognize that. Like, I was getting warm, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm having a panic attack because that's one of the things, is getting this warm, sweaty. Or maybe it was because I was doing physical activity. Like, I was having trouble recognizing the two differences. So I learned how to do that. I learned how my body reacted to certain things. So I had to learn how to recognize when a panic attack was coming on, so I could start to implement the tools that I now have to prevent it. Another big part was after the panic attack. that come down from it, because it's just basically like pure adrenaline. I'm generally quite tired and kind of beat after it, so I allow myself to kind of relax and just kind of reflect on everything that happened. So a big part about panic attacks too is they can often occur for no reason. So it's not like an anxiety attack where it's this buildup, like this stressful situation that builds, and then happens. A panic attack for me could just be a thought pattern, and all of a sudden I can just go into it. So I've mentioned before, like I've witnessed so many traumas in my life that have never actually occurred. And that's like this struggle in my head, and that's where all my suffering is it's this constant dialogue that I'm in trouble, but I'm actually not. So it's spotting that and catching these thought patterns and changing that thought pattern. Another huge part is limiting alcohol. For me, it's 0 alcohol because I'm sober. But for somebody that's struggling, is really limiting alcohol, because that alcohol is going to throw off the way your body reacts, which in turn is going to send a different message to your brain. A hangover can be an easy way to think you're having a panic attack. Caffeine and sugar intake is another huge thing. Those must be reduced to manage anxiety as well as panic attack. A huge part for me that I always talk about is my journal and a feelings journal. So anytime I do feel panic or anxiety, I write it down, and I write it down what was occurring and what the outcome was. And it allows me to look back and recognize some themes that are occurring, and or just reminds me that every time it's happened, I've made it through it. So a huge part for me is I constantly think that I'm going to pass out when I'm having these panic attacks. And I've never actually passed out in 20 years of having panic attacks, knock on wood. But with that said, it's never actually happened. And every time it starts to come on, all that I go back to is this original panic attack that I've had and this negative experience when I've had however many of them in my life. And I never go back to the thought that never once is what I thought was going to happen occurred. So it's like, that's just the way the brain works. So I make the feelings journal. That's a super big important part for me. Some tools that I use. A great one when I feel it coming on. So a perfect example would be if I were in a packed subway car or something and I'm trapped, quote unquote. A great grounding tool. So this is a very common one. It's find 5 things you can see and recognize them, 4 things you can touch and touch them, 3 things you can hear and recognize them and remember what they are, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. These are going to allow your brain to kind of focus on something else and stop that racing thought. So it's a really important thing. It's 5 easy things to do. I use these as well as, like, say when I'm sitting in traffic in rush hour and I'm frustrated and I just want to get out of there and I can feel my anxiety rising. This is a great thing to do. Another great thing is learning some good breathing habits. Deep breathing, managing your breathing to make sure that you are breathing in and out. Diaphragm breathing, so taking a deep inhale through your nose, starting in your stomach, pushing out that diaphragm and bringing it up through, and then holding it, and then releasing long exhale through your chest, down through your diaphragm and out through your stomach. And what that allows you to do is get good air into you, but a couple of those will really ground you. Distraction tools, for me, a huge one is basically number games on my cell phone. Those allow me just to, again, hyper focus on something else than what's going on technically in my head. So if I'm sitting in a lineup somewhere, for instance, at say the DMV, and I'm sitting in line there, I'll play that, and it allows me to just not focus on whatever I think is going on and just give me this distraction. So tricking my brain into something else. My higher power. So for me, this took obviously a long journey, because when I first found sobriety, I still had active and aggressive panic disorder and anxiety, and I didn't believe in God, and that wasn't working for me. So I slowly found this higher power, and that was nature and animals. And then over time, it's developed into being a higher power, which is, for me, is God right now. And so I have these conversations, and if I need to, if I'm out by myself or in the car or something like that, I will say, like, listen, God, out loud I'll say this, like verbally. Listen, God, you got to take this from me. I can't do this right now. I can't handle this. I need you to take control of this. And what that allows me to do is it's getting some air out of me, first off. Second off, it allows me to try to give away that struggle, give away that anxiety, give away that panic. And that seems to work. Another great option, if you're not spiritual or religious or anything like that, is reach out to somebody. Give somebody a call. I had a panic attack while I was on the chairlift going up a hill. And that's not a place you want to pass out. If you fall off a chairlift, you're in trouble. And I just called a friend. I was like, hey man, what's going on? And I just, that helped me. Again, it's that distraction. Take me out of it. Because panic attacks are brief, but they're aggressive. And it feels to me like I'm going to die. So it's good, just that distraction, that helps a lot too. Another big part too is acknowledging the feeling. I learned a good thing in a 12-step program, that this too shall pass, and it's going to pass. And just acknowledging it, basically, instead of trying to fight the energy that's coming through, just acknowledge it and letting it pass through, and accepting that these thoughts are coming through. And I know it sounds crazy to say accept it, but acknowledge it. Just let it kind of come through you, and the less that you fight it, the more it's going to just kind of dissipate out. That's been a really difficult tool for me to learn, but I do have a pretty good grasp of it now. I used this when I was on Family Feud. I was like, well, this is happening, I'm here, and I felt all those feelings. And if you watch back on the video, you'll see me moving a lot. That's a big thing for me. So what that's doing is, when I'm moving, it's reaffirming that my feet are planted, my legs are working, I'm breathing. So that's something that I notice in other people doing now, but just from my own behaviors. So that's a really important thing too. So hopefully that gives you some insight into all of this. So that's my experience with panic attacks. Those are some of my coping mechanisms and tools that I use on a daily basis. But like I said at the beginning, your doctor's there for a reason. Use your mental health people. Reach out to people, and by all means share your experiences. I hear people talk all the time about, this happened to me or this happened to me, and they just never shared it with anybody. And getting that out there can really take a lot of that stress away. Something that I learned just in my last 4 years kind of life is that when I'm stressed or tired or whatever, angry, anything like that, I try to give it away. And what I mean by that is I try to redirect that energy in a positive way. So whether that's going out and doing something for somebody else, or reaching out to somebody I haven't spoken to in a while, I try to give away that energy in a positive nature, in turn making me feel good, also relieves me of that pressure. So it's a tool that I've really enjoyed using that has dual purpose to it. So that's pretty much all that I've got for today. I really appreciate anybody and everyone listening today. This is a tricky situation. Mental health is, there's no right or wrong on it. And hopefully you can take something positive away from this experience. If you ever have any questions, my information is listed in the description of the video for both email and social media. Leave comments in the comments section. If you have any questions, by all means, hit me up. Otherwise, I hope everyone has an amazing day. I'm Ryan. This is No Bad Days. Take care.